Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for a video which I've been meaning to do for a while, but for some reason just never got around to doing it. But today is the day where I finally bring to you a long-awaited part 2. About 5 months ago now, I made a video looking at some of the worst teams in the history of football, which you can check out in the description if you haven't watched it already. Although you must be warned that there is a severe lack of quality in terms of both production and presentation, so watch at your own discretion. And I promised a part 2 if the demand was there. And 4 months too late, here is that follow-up video. It's always difficult to judge who the worst teams in football actually are, because whilst Sheffield United only have 1 point from 10 Premier League games as of the time of this recording, which is the worst start in Premier League history by any team, I'm sure that they would comfortably smash apart teams from the 6th and 7th tiers by a considerable margin on a weekly basis, and likewise, those who are flying high in those divisions would struggle when put into the upper echelons of the game. However, much like last time, I'm going on the basis of where the team was at the time, and how much strife they found themselves when competing at that level, and I'll try to use a mixture of higher profile teams as well as some more obscure ones. And of course, the list is in no particular order. So without any further ado, here is a part 2 of 10 more of the worst football teams in football history. Number 1. Berwick City. I included a Scottish team in East Stirlingshire last time out, and it is another team from the country up north with whom we begin our list. The most recent team to feature in terms of when they hit their own nadir alongside another Scottish team who will feature later on, Berwick City have had a pretty inauspicious history thus far, never featuring in the Premier Division and only sporadically featuring in the 2nd tier. However, they won a shock promotion to the Championship in 2017 via the playoffs, despite finishing in 4th in that season's League One, and whilst expectations were obviously set quite low, I don't think anyone would have expected the new low that they would hit. Over a 36-game campaign, they would amass just 4 points, all of them through draws, meaning that they became the first Scottish senior side in 126 years to fail to win a game during a single season, conceding 90 goals in the process and finishing 26 points behind 9th place Dumbarton. Things will somehow get worse in 2018-19, as despite high expectations in a lower league, they finished last once again, being relegated by just a single point behind Stenhousemuir, and last season they were the team occupying last place in Scottish League 2 when the campaign was suspended owing to the coronavirus pandemic. After 6 games of this season, which was put on hold after the national lockdown in Scotland was reintroduced last month, you could probably hazard a wild guess as to where they currently sit in the league. That's right, they're in last place again, albeit only on goal difference this time. Talk about a fall from grace. Number 2. RBC Roosendaal. RBC Roosendaal were an amateur club as late as 1983, but they enjoyed an emergence in the late 90s to early noughties, winning promotion to the Eredivisie for the first time in their history in 2000, but they were relegated straight away. They would bounce back immediately and go on to spend the next 4 seasons in the Dutch top flight, but that 4th season in question would go horribly wrong. They had only narrowly avoided relegation the previous season by virtue of finishing just above the relegation playoff spot, but by the end of the 2005-2006 season, they had won just once, a 2-0 win against NAC Nijmegen, and they'd only accrued 9 points, finishing bottom of the league, a staggering 19 points adrift of Willem II. They came close to winning promotion back to the Eredivisie straight away, but they were losing the playoffs to Excelsior, and within 4 years, the club had accumulated debts of over €500,000 which they couldn't pay back, and in 2011, they were declared bankrupt by the Dutch football authorities after a request for a €1 million guarantee from the local government was rejected. Just 6 years after mixing with the likes of Ajax, PSV and Feyenoord, they had to restart again in the 9th tier of Dutch football, facing more financial issues in the last year which nearly blighted their promotion to the 7th tier. Number 3. Fort William. I promise I'm not picking on Scotland here, but they managed to become the only country who features twice in some capacity in this video. Fort William FC are located in the Scottish Highlands, and their stadium overlooks, or shall we say underlooks, Ben Nevis, but their form was so bad that their plight even got turned into a documentary produced by the BBC, profiling their entire 2018-19 campaign in all its glory. They compete in the Highland League, which is the league below the Scottish League 2, but since 1985 they haven't finished in the top half once, they've finished in the bottom 3 29 times, including every single season barring 2 since 1991, and they've claimed the wooden spoon on 17 occasions. Their low point was undoubtedly between 2017 and 2019, when they won a game on the 23rd of August 2017, but wouldn't win another game in all competitions for 707 days, including 2 consecutive seasons in which they didn't win a single league game. In 2017-18, they would amass just 5 points and concede a staggering 184 goals, and they hit a financial meltdown, only being saved as a result of a last-minute intervention permitting them to carry on for at least another season. As the season wore on though, there might have been questions asked as to why they even bothered, as they would be penalised on 3 separate occasions when they fielded an ineligible player, being deducted 3 points for each indiscretion, meaning that, after only drawing twice all season, they ended the campaign on -7 points. Although I haven't verified this claim, I would presume, certainly in that division at least, that has to be a record low, as does their 245 goals conceded tally across the entire season, and 10 occasions when they conceded 10 or more goals in a single game. Their wretched run came to an end after they beat Nairn County on the 31st of July 2019 2-0 in a North of Scotland Cup game, one day after their documentary was released, and they won widespread attention and love from the wider public, including from Scottish politicians. I guess quitters never win, eh? Number 4. Delfino Pescara. In terms of the number of points they mustered in the season in question, Pescara seemed like title winners in comparison to some of the other dross that we have on display, considering they managed to win 18 points during their 2016-17 campaign. However, I'm more concerned with the events off the pitch than on it, and whilst I could have included Doncaster in 1997-98 or Leyton Orient in 1994-95, the latter of whose plight was also turned into a documentary, much like Fort Williams, for their separate off-pitch notorieties, it is Pescara who the spotlight is shining on here. Of course, when the players took to the field, they didn't particularly shower themselves in much glory, only winning one away game all season, and that was a defaulted 3-0 win that was awarded to them after Sassuolo had fielded an ineligible player against them, rendering their 2-1 win null and void, and only winning twice more all season, and conceding 81 goals in the process. As you may expect, the fans were not best pleased with the form of the previous season's Serie B winners once they had got into Serie A, and they started to target the president and his team, and I'm not talking just in a verbal context. During the team's Christmas party, fans had to be held back by the police after they spat at the players, attacked their cars, and threw fireworks into the restaurant in which they were eating, and the president wouldn't get off scot-free either, as his house was cherry bombed and 2 cars were set alight on his driveway. I'm not quite sure what kind of motivation that's meant to give to the players, to be quite honest with you, but whatever their incentives were, they didn't work, as Pescara spent 14 weeks at the bottom of the table and finished 8 points behind 19th place Palermo and 16 points away from safety. Number 5. The Dutch East Indies. The Dutch East Indies, who are what we now know today as Indonesia, made history at the 1938 World Cup finals in France after becoming Asia's first ever representative at a World Cup tournament. Unfortunately, their appearance at the finals wouldn't prove to be as memorable as many people had hoped, and in their first game, which was a straight knockout match, they were drawn against Hungary, who promptly proceeded to batter them 6-0 and go on to reach the final, where they lost to Italy. After having made such a lengthy and presumably exhausting voyage to France, there must have been a bitter pill to swallow, especially since they had to return on the first plane, or boat rather, back home. I could have included the Bolivia side of the 1950 World Cup, who were thrashed 8-0 by Uruguay in their only game of the tournament, but Bolivia have gone on to qualify for another World Cup since that hounding, whereas Indonesia haven't even come close to qualifying since 1986, when they lost in the Asian qualification playoff semi-finals to South Korea. Number 6. Bristol City. We move back to Blighty for our next entrance, as Bristol City had a meltdown unlike any other seen in the English game, perhaps before or since. In 1976, they won promotion to the First Division for the first time since 1911, although they wouldn't finish any higher than 13th in their 4 seasons in the top flight before being relegated in 1980, and they haven't been able to return since. However, their downward spiral would continue in earnest, as they became the first club in England to suffer 3 consecutive relegations from the top tier all the way down to the bottom professional tier, all the while seeing their debts skyrocket and financial issues worsen. Things got so bad that, in 1982, 8 players were summoned to the ballroom for an urgent meeting, and they were told that their contracts would have to be terminated, with their rebate only accounting for half of what they were actually owed in such a process. They are now known today as the Ashton Gate 8, widely credited for helping keep the club afloat and venerated with a plaque outside of Bristol City's new stadium, but their individual consequences would be severe, with their captain, Jeff Merrick, never playing pro football again, and Trevor Tainton falling into bankruptcy. They would eventually be recompensed with over £150,000 after action from the PFA, and Bristol City managed to just about recover and win promotion back to Division 3 in 1984, but that 3-year period was about as bleak as any club can experience at any moment. Number 7. Tahiti. This is a harsh inclusion, I will admit, because Tahiti did make history upon qualifying for the 2013 Confederations Cup, and I was willing them on as much as anyone, but unfortunately, they really did seem like a fish out of water when they travelled to Brazil. The year before, they became the first nation who weren't called Australia or New Zealand to win the UFC Nations Cup, meaning that they earned themselves qualification to the precursor for the World Cup in 2013, and they were drawn in a group alongside Spain, Uruguay and Nigeria. It was an amazing opportunity for the players regardless of how things transpired, and they managed to score in their opening game against Nigeria through a Jonathan Tehau header, celebrating with a rowing boat reenactment on the pitch. Unfortunately, by that stage, they had already conceded 3 goals and were going to concede 3 more before the game was out, losing 6-1 before being annihilated by both Spain and Uruguay. Spain would score 10 and Uruguay 8, with both tallies being unanswered, leaving Tahiti with a goal difference of -23, the worst in any organised FIFA competition in its history. And whilst they gained a cult following in Brazil and were praised for their fair play by the Spanish, there can be no denying that they were well and truly put in their place. Number 8. FC Grenchen. A fate unlike any other in this list, FC Grenchen are a Swiss team who have never played in the Swiss Super League in its history, and they haven't even come remotely close since the 1960s. They hit the headlines in 2014 after a spectacularly catastrophic run whilst they were in the 4th tier ended with dramatic and drastic consequences. They had just lost their 9th game in a row to Lausanne by a scoreline of 10-0, conceding a ridiculous 66 goals in that 9-game spell, and their sporting director, Renato Brunn, decided that the only option possible was to sack all of the 11 players who had played in that 10-0 defeat. Yes, every single one. Koln was quoted as saying, "It sounds brutal, but the players aren't good enough for this league," with one of their players fired, Dedai Gilgajan, responding to this, as well as accusations that they mocked the boss and trading positive by Brunn by stating that it was quote-unquote character assassination and that it wasn't entirely the players' fault. By the end of the campaign, his judgments may well have been vindicated, as Grenchen had only win 1 game out of 26, leaking 147 goals and finishing in last place. After another relegation the next season, they now find themselves in the 6th tier of Swiss football. Number 9. Luxemburg. The tiny nation which borders France, Belgium and Germany have a distinct record which I'm sure they will not be particularly proud of, as they have tried to qualify for every single FIFA World Cup since 1984, when the qualification was first introduced, and the Euros for every tournament since 1964. Perhaps unsurprisingly considering their status and size, they haven't qualified for a single one of those tournaments, only featuring in 6 Olympic Games competitions between 1920 and 1952. Their Euro qualifying record makes for grim reading, as across 111 games they have won just 8 of them, losing 98 and conceding 319 goals, but somehow their World Cup qualification statistics are even worse, as despite playing in 134 games, 23 more than they have for the Euros, they've only tasted victory 5 times across a staggering 20 qualification attempts, all of which of course have proved to be fruitless. 119 of those games have ended in defeat, and they've leaked 433 goals, only mustering 69 in return, with their worst campaign coming in 2006 as they lost all 12 games, shipping 48 goals in the process. As you would expect, they are the nation who have attempted to qualify for the highest number of FIFA recognised tournaments without making one, and to be honest with you, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Number 10. MKE Ankaragucu. We end our video with a trip into Turkey for MKE Ankaragucu, who it's pretty safe to say endured some tough times in the early 2010s. In 2009, the club entered hot water after it emerged that their owner had close associations with division rivals Ankaraspor, and when attempts to merge the clubs failed, Ankaraspor were forcibly relegated by the Turkish authorities for the supposedly unsporting connection. The man in question, Ahmet Göksek, promised the championship in the next few years, but of course, as is so often the case when those kinds of promises are made, the club entered financial meltdown, and a revolving door of chairmen was set in motion, as no fewer than 5 would take the reins over the next 3 years in an attempt to try and solve those clubs' financial problems. It was only a matter of time before the boardroom chaos spilled over onto the pitch, and sure enough, in 2011-12, Ankaragucu would finish last place in the Super League, only winning twice all season and finishing on a paltry 11 points. The next season, they suffered a 2nd consecutive relegation after a 29-point campaign left them hung out to dry by the rest of the league. It would take 4 more seasons for them to return to the 2nd tier, although they do find themselves competing in the top flight once more, only being spared the ignominy of relegation last season after relegation was abandoned in light of the pandemic curtailing the Turkish league season. that just about wraps up today's video on 10 more of the worst teams in football history. I really do hope that you have enjoyed it. Again, if you missed part 1, then the link to it is in the description down below. And if you did enjoy this video, please do hit that like button and hit that subscribe button while you are at it if you have not done so already. Thank you very, very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.